Well, obviously the most significant deal we saw was the world transfer record being broken. Manchester United really asserting themselves under the new management of Mourinho by going out and signing Paul Pogba, and it took 105 million euros to bring him in from Italy just a few years after he left Manchester United for barely anything. So that was really the defining deal, because it also showed that the Premier League is able to attract the most attractive and in-demand players again. For some years we've thought of Spain being maybe the destination for the top players, even though England was host to perhaps the most competitive league. But that was a really significant deal, and it came quite early before the end of the window as well. Well, we could look actually again to Manchester United and a player towards the end of his career potentially, which is Zlatan Ibrahimovic. He's the type of big Galactico type signing that Manchester United craves as it goes with its marketing juggernaut round the world, selling sponsorships and attempting to sell even more of its Adidas shirts, which funds a lot of this big spending. But in general, it's the fact that there is a breadth of spending across the league which is so significant. When you've got 13 of the 20 Premier League clubs breaking their transfer records, it really sends the message out to the world, the fact that there is this heavy spending and financial power available that seems to be unrivaled and unmatchable in most parts of the rest of the football world, beyond the sort of the big clubs like Barcelona, Real Madrid and Bayern Munich. Well, that's a great concern of the Premier League clubs. They actually think they're being overcharged by a lot of European clubs. Clubs on the continent know that these Premier League clubs are very cash rich now. Even by coming bottom of the Premier League, they might earn around £100 million in prize and television money this season. So the clubs that are selling know that the buying clubs are very wealthy. So you've got to look at some of these deals and question just what value are they getting. And the ultimate prize is, though, staying in the Premier League, because as long as these clubs stay in the Premier League to cash the television checks every year, then it's a success. But you have to look across the league maybe as the months go on and just assess, have they actually been overspending? One of the most interesting deals, in fact, is the biggest shock of the window, perhaps, is Chelsea re-signing David Luiz after a couple of years after selling him to Paris Saint-Germain, although they got him back for 20 million less than they sold him, it seems. Well, that'll be interesting to see in the coming months, because last season it was one of the teams that spent very little, Leicester, who actually won the Premier League. And as we look to this season, none of the big clubs want to be embarrassed again and lose out to the title to an unfancied team that hasn't really spent much. So it would seem wise if a club has spent very little and ends up winning the league again. That would seem very savvy. But if you try to do a Leicester and then end up getting relegated, then it could look very unsatisfactory and the wrong move. But there are clubs that have been more prudent, but the question is whether that's out of choice or out of necessity, because they've not been able to push deals over the line. You look at certain clubs who haven't really spent heavily. 7 clubs obviously didn't break their transfer records, but there's probably that intent across the league to actually reinvest some of this money around. One of the most important things beyond signing players was shedding the squad, in terms of making sure the squad wasn't overloaded. So Manchester City's priority in the last few days was actually removing players and sending them out on loan to other teams, because they don't they can't accommodate all these players necessarily that the new manager, Pep Guardiola, wants in the team. And crucially for clubs is also the wage bill. We focus a lot on how much they're spending on new signings for the actual transfer fee, but at the same time, these players are demanding huge wages, and actually clubs have got to be very careful that their wage bills don't sort of escalate significantly. So they've had the dual challenge in recent weeks to not only search for bargains, but to cut deals. No problem.